Hi and welcome to It's About You, the show that talks about things that matter to youth. I'm Fanashe. Now, today's topic will be talking about the National Higher Education Fund, or PTPTN. Now, it's a hot topic right now. There has been many calls from student bodies and MPs even to help students with their growing loans. But writing off this debt, as we've seen in the news or from the government side, could be a lot harder than we think, right? Which begs the question really that it's maybe time to think about creating a more sustainable higher education financing program. Now with us to discuss this more is Ooi Kok Hin, from a research manager from the center. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Now, let's first look at what the government has given during the budget, right? With PTPTN, the government said they will be giving 20% discount for 3 months, starting March 1st, and deferring repayments for borrowers with a monthly income of 1,800 ringgit. Now, this is a bit far from the calls of targeted abolishment, but it's something. So, is this good news for students per se, or rather, is this enough?
I would say the announcement regarding PTPTN in budget 2023 that was recently announced by the Finance Minister and Prime Minister, Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim, it's a little bit underwhelming and subpar. However, I think kita boleh bagi ruang sebab this is their first budget and they only have about less than 4 months to work on it after Anwar was sworn in as Prime Minister. Nonetheless, as you pointed out, this was actually quite far from what the coalitions were promising during the general election last year. For example, Pakatan Harapan actually promised that the threshold to begin payment will be 4,000 ringgit. So yang sekarang ini dia delay payment for 1,800 ringgit and below. So that's 2,200 ringgit below what they were promised. We understand that it takes time to study, to come up with the proper mechanism to resolve this. So we hope that hopefully if this government go full term, they'll have 4 more budget to announce good policy change, and I hope that it will involve PTPTN. Another thing that of course people would say, this is Kerajaan Perpaduan. This is not PH, it's not BN. Yeah. But I think both PH and BN actually have enough in common that they can come up with a common agenda on PTPTN. And even on a broader scale, actually, it's about higher education financing, right? Macam mana kita dah bayar untuk pendidikan tinggi anak-anak.
Yes.
So, for example, both PH and BN actually agree in their manifesto to provide apa orang kata direct subsidy ataupun scholarship for B40 students. So, for if you are from B40 family, if you are from a low income family, your tuition no need to pakai loan. So that will be government subsidy and so on, which is more sustainable. I mean, as we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Because we know from data that if a lot of low-income families, students from low-income families, diorang tak dapat bayar balik the pinjaman kan. So it helps the government and it helps them to reduce that loan dependency.
Yeah. So I mean, talking about loan dependency and also B40 group not being able to pay this back, there has been many calls about abolishing PTPTN, right? In fact, like you said just now, some of it is election promises as well. Now the government already said that it won't abolish PTPTN and it would incur 2 higher costs. It said over 42 billion with the 1.8 million borrowers right now. Do you think this is the right move, abolishing PTPTN? Is this fair to students who are struggling to pay for their PTPTN?
Actually, we know that in the current parliament sitting, there were debates in parliament about whether government should abolish PTPTN, and then the minister sort of respond. The economy minister basically respond that oh, we didn't promise that in G15 and so on. Pada pandangan saya, actually we don't have to be stuck at this level of debate. Sebab the one that promised to abolish PTPTN was 10 years ago, Pakatan Rakyat in 2013. But every government since then, whether it's during Najib's time, and then it was to Dr. Mahathir's second time as Prime Minister, and then PN, all the government still realised that the current PTPTN agenda is unsustainable, and there has to be something to be done. So it's not an all or nothing approach. Sama ada, okay, kita kekalkan status quo, let's not do anything, or completely abolish it. There's actually not either or. And I think that policymakers can actually come together and discuss what is the right resolutions that we can mitigate this problem, so that the loan dependency doesn't get too over the cliff. And also the second thing would be to make sure PTPTN itself is sustainable. as you pointed out earlier, there was billions of debt that are guaranteed by the government because PTPTN is a statutory body, badan berkanun. So if they go into major, let's say bankruptcy or whatever, it's actually a huge repercussion on the government punya budget and the Malaysia economy as a whole. Because government guarantees their budget, their debt. Sorry.
Yeah, writing out this debt would be too high a cost, and like you said, there should be other measures that they can explore to sort of make it more sustainable. But we'll discuss a bit more about that later. Now let's talk about struggles of PTPTN, because this has been highlighted a lot. From the perspective of former students and youth, I guess. Students will graduate and be employed and spend half their life paying for PTPTN, or probably most of their life, God knows. Why are so many feeling the pinch when it comes to paying their PTPTN loan? What are the challenges faced by groups, especially B40?
Well, I think some of the major problems that we have encountered, the center, we conducted a series of research on this. And basically encounter that there are a lot of people who face difficulty in landing, firstly, a job at all. A lot of them are unemployed atau underemployed. Underemployed maksudnya if you study for a certain qualification, let's say you get a degree in marketing, but you ended up working as a Grab driver or food panda. So you are actually working beneath the qualification that you ada. So banyak orang yang unemployed atau underemployed. And kedua is, I think our salaries lah. Our salaries are quite stagnant, wage stagnant. It has not been, the increase has not been on par with inflation, and also the rising cost of living lah generally kan. So I think this has put a lot of people under financial pressure. So just to quote, maybe share some data lah.
Sure.
For example, in 2018, kalau tak silap I, the Kementerian Pengajian Tinggi, they have what they call tracer kan, my tracer study. So they basically distribute survey among those who have graduated from university 1 year after kan. They found that about 60% were or are unemployed, a year after they graduate. So that's a huge number, and half of them that were unemployed, they have PTPTN loans to service. So how are they going to pay, if they don't even have a proper job to begin with? And also PTPTN itself, I believe in 2019, they themselves conducted a study also. So they found that, the huge portion, I think about 33%, if not more, of their borrowers actually earn about less than 2,000 ringgit a month. So that's a huge number that earn 2,000 ringgit and below. So that makes it difficult for them to, even fork out slight payment kan, sebab dia ada banyak komitmen lain, dia kena bayar semua. So those are some of the things that we have found.
But at the same time, there are people you see in the news sometimes, right? Oh, I use my PTPTN money to start a business. I use my PTN money to do this and that. So students actually, how do they manage their from your experience and from your research, when they've given this kind of financial help? How do they manage their PTPTN well? Is the loan actually enough to cover their expenses?
Yeah, we have to be careful here, because walaupun kita cakap the loan may not be enough to sustain their cost of living, that doesn't mean that we should increase the loan available to them. That is what the government tries to do with, let's say, 100% financing, right? That means they give full loan instead of, let's say, 80% of the cost punya, what they study punya cost lah. They give 100%. That is not always the best thing, because the more loan you give, actually the more hutang they accumulate. And don't forget, there's also interest charges. Whether you call it interest or ujrah, there are, your loan amount will increase if you don't pay, right? So that's something we have to be careful here. From our studies, we actually found that most people actually must spend for basic cost of living. Of course, there are some that actually use the money to help their families. Like or not, B40 students, when they come to university, they got PTPTN loan. They don't just pay for their own makanan, their own costs. They actually have to worry about families back home. So that's actually tidak hairan lah. We have heard stories of how certain people makan very simple food like nasi bujang kind of thing, so that they can send money back. So even though they are still studying, right, this is something you would expect from workers, but students themselves do it too with their money. However, like I said, the solution is not always in increasing the loan amount available to these students.
Okay, I want to get back, rewind a little bit on what you said about these graduates being either unemployed or underemployed. So obviously PTPTN give the loan based off needs, right? Based on your household income, based on the type of institution you're going to, based on the course you're pursuing. So there is sort of an intention to invest in graduates who will hopefully be quality graduates. Let's put aside the fact that they have to repay the loan later, but you know, an investment to higher education, right? So getting the bang for the buck, right? Do you think, you know, with this kind of financing aid, are we producing like quality graduates, or like you said just now, those who just end up struggling in the workforce? Do you think there is enough investment to, I wouldn't say aftercare, but you know, getting the bang for the buck, right? You're financing them, so.
There's definitely more that the government can do to ensure that the graduates, lepas dah graduate, dia dapat kerja yang berpatutan dan sebagainya. So that's where your reskilling come in, that's where your career fairs organised by government come in, that's where your incentive dan sebagainya come in for the private sector to hire and so on. But at the same time, you know, when you talk about needs kan tadi, then the government try to invest and so on. Actually, the PTPTN origin started from, it's an extension of Malaysian incorporated policy in the past by Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. So basically, they were trying to cut down government spending, public spending lah. So to reduce the deficit and so on. So there's some neoliberal rhetoric that is embedded in there. So I like that you brought the point back about, you know, investing in the future. Kan? This is something that we shouldn't look at it as macam profit loss dan sebagainya. This is memang investing in our kids' future, so that they can actually propel the nation forward dan sebagainya. We can talk about socio-economic mobility lah. So dulu, if you dapat higher education degree, you almost confirm lah dapat kerja yang bagus. But because now there is so massification of higher education, every year we produce so many graduates, kan? So that promise macam dah kurang. So you borrow PTPTN, especially if you study in IPTS, private punya, you borrow 60,000 ringgit. You come out, you get a job, 2,000 ringgit.
Yeah.
So that has that rhetoric of, you know, investing in your future tu, dia macam dah semakin dicabar. It may not be as true today as compared to in the past. So I think that's something that the government and also the public has to take into consideration, especially maybe the older generation. When we talk about PTPTN borrowers today, it's not that they are lazy, it's not that they are asking for, you know, their debts to be cancelled just like that and all that. But the situation here is really different. Today, if you borrow 50,000 ringgit to study, you end up coming of job with just 2,000 ringgit. You know, the economic reality for them is different.
There's
today.
a lot of disparity here. All right, we'll get into, you know, we'll discuss some of the issues, we'll get into some of the solutions after this break. Hi and welcome back to It's About Youth. Today we are talking about PTPTN and I have here with me Kok Hin from the Centre. Now, just now we talked about some of the issues surrounding PTPTN. We talked about, you know, difficulty in repayments with V40, government debt and all that. Now we want to talk a little bit on solutions. First of all, we know that there are a lot of PTPTN defectors. I think I wouldn't say defectors per se, but people who aren't able to pay their PTPTN loan. But clearly, if I want to be a bit draconian about it, right, you borrow, you pay lah kan? So how do we deal with PTPTN defectors?
So I would say that first of all we have to understand like PTPTN is actually borrowing money from financial market. They borrow from banks and so on to borrow to students. So that in itself already show you that it's not that the government give direct money to PTPTN. PTPTN actually borrow from the financial market and then they borrow it to students. And there's a whole neoliberal logic there lah, where you treat students like consumers. Kan? So now kita macam seolah-olah dah corrupt our notion of higher education, where you actually borrow money, you consumer, and then you will become a borrower.
A bit draconian lah.
Yeah, you become a borrower,
you
and
borrow,
then
you pay.
You should pay back. Instead of in the past, maybe if you go back to 40 or 50 years ago, if you say to somebody in a rural village in Kedah, you say, oh yeah, how about you borrow 20,000 ringgit to go study? They say you crazy. You know, for them, that notion does not even occur.
Yeah.
Because the fact that you, the individual, the student ataupun the citizen kena bayar mengambil hutang yang begitu banyak just to pursue higher education. In the past we look at education more as a public good lah. Kan mungkin kalau nak bayar duit tu mungkin just to cover your own cost of living. Itu pun waktu tu banyak the mahasiswa. Sekarang dah banyak kurang. My brain dan sebagainya peruntukan telah dipotong. So I think there's that problem there. Talking about defaulters, there are people that did not. So actually there are two categories of defaulters. Satu type of defaulters ni is dia bayar tapi dia tak bayar amount yang ditentukan. Okay, so for example, maybe each month they have to pay RM200, but dia bayar RM50 setiap bulan. Actually banyak orang yang macam tu. It doesn't mean that they completely tak bayar. They are responsible, they feel guilty kalau tak bayar kan. So dia bayar sikit walaupun gaji dia sikit, dia bayar sikit. And then the second type is what they categorize as hardcore defaulters. Orang yang tak pernah bayar langsung. So there are data that showing how much is each category lah. Actually the loan collection is a problem, right? Not everybody fully repay their loan. But like I mentioned just now, PTPTN itself borrow money from financial market. So that's actually the other half of the equation. Maybe people don't realize this enough. The gap in PTPTN punya debt yang dia accumulate ni bukan sahaja disebabkan oleh loan collection dia yang kurang, tapi juga because of the difference in the interest rate they are paying. So they lend out to student at 1%. Tapi dia borrow from financial market about 4 to 5%.
I see.
So each year dia bertambah, dia punya gap bertambah kan. So maybe if I'm not mistaken lah, in 2018 their annual report, the government give PTPTN about 1.9 billion a year, 1.9 billion, and 1.7 billion digunakan untuk pay interest rate sahaja.
Oh God.
So there's like, I don't know, 80-90% of the government funds for PTPTN is used to pay the interest rate. So that itself is a problem right there.
So like you mentioned just now, so clearly the issue is making it sustainable, right? Because the current model right now is not as sustainable. With that problem in mind, let's look at maintaining PTPTN. I have a few stats here. As at the end of September 2021, total PTPTN disbursement reached 64.8 billion ringgit to more than 3.5 million students. So 2.4 million of these students who graduate, less than half actually consistently pay their loans, coupled with the fact that nearly 60% of borrowers are actually from the B40 group. They also receive 60% of the amount disbursed. So, but like you said just now, it's not just this, it's also, you know, the commercial side of it, the financial institution market side of it. So, this is a lot of numbers, but it's simple. With more people getting into higher education, we have more of this every year. You know, more PTPTN loans need to be given out. So how do we make this, and like we've discussed, forgiving all or part of PTPTN loans will not solve the issue. So how do we make it sustainable?
So there's multiple issues to be unpacked there. So maybe we have to go one by one. Memang betul, there's increasingly large number of people wanting to go to higher education, and credit to PTPTN themselves, they realize that diorang pun nak reduce loan dependency. I've interviewed PTPTN officials also for my research, and they have acknowledged that kita pun tak nak orang bergantung sepenuhnya pada PTPTN. So that is why they have SSBN, ISSB and sebagainya. So these are basically saving schemes lah. So they provide a lot of incentive to encourage people to invest, membuat simpanan, menabung for their kids' future, so that by the time they reach 17, 18 years old, you don't have to take out loans, or at least not complete loans, right, to finance for their higher education. So that's one aspect direction yang they are trying to take, which is reduce loan dependency, encourage savings. Walau bagaimanapun, we know that poor people kurang savings. They don't have the money to begin with. So this is where perhaps the government should consider. Like we said earlier, this is actually promised in the BN and PH manifesto. So for the poor, you bagi tuition subsidy, right? Instead of giving loan, you bagi tuition subsidy terus, because you know that they don't have enough to save anyway. I believe there is a study by Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, right, which shows that the poor spend how much on their discretionary spending. They spend on makanan, nutrition dan sebagainya. So memang setiap bulan tinggal baki RM30, very sikit. How to invest? Save money. There's also PTPTN has also macam their cap lah. So I think about every year 200,000 loans they issue. they try not to be drastically
above
more
it,
than
yeah.
that because they know it's unsustainable.
Yeah.
So that's credit to them also. I also want to add to the statistic that you mentioned just now. About 55% ataupun 60% lah in
Yeah, at
between
least
that range.
60%, yeah.
About 60% of PTPTN borrowers come from B40. But among the defaulters, 97% come from B40. So walaupun PTPTN borrowers 60% of them B40, tapi yang suka bayar pinjaman actually 97% B40. So you can see the disproportion.
Yeah.
So I think that data shows you proof empirically that perkara ni memang membebankanlah orang yang lebih miskin kan. It affects them more than the rich.
So talking about a bit of, I guess, short-term and long-term measures as well, structural changes if you can. Obviously, the B40 lectures, it's the core group that is struggling to pay for PTPTN. The government has announced, a few cost of living measures, I guess, to help with the B40. Do you think these are enough, or do we need more long-term structural changes or solutions to help students with their PTP or to help graduates with their PTPTN woes?
Well, I think the consensus in the room is actually not enough, but we give space for the government because it's still early in the administration. We can't completely judge if they have, gagal atau berjaya. So hopefully in the next 4 budget lah, they will come up with something more significant and radical, I believe, because you cannot just make piecemeal changes for such a big thing as PTPTN. You cannot make piecemeal changes. You need some radical actions. So okay, instead of thinking short term and long term, I would suggest we think of it this way lah. So the first set of the problem actually involve loan yang telah diberi.
Okay.
So the debt is out there already, kan? And the second set of problem is actually the future. Okay, do we still want to encourage people to borrow money and accumulate the debt? So for the first set of problem, involve the current defaulters dan sebagainya. So firstly, you can have introducing income-based repayment. Surprisingly, we don't really enforce this yet in Malaysia. In many other countries, they have. So what income-based repayment entail is that dia ada tiering dengan threshold. Threshold maksudnya if you earn a certain set of income, baru you pay.
Yeah.
So this is what the government try to do in budget 2023. If you earn 1,800 ringgit and below, you don't have to pay. So that's actually quite common in like Australia. Cumanya I think their threshold is higher lah. So maybe you start paying once you reach a certain income.
Yeah.
Tiering maksudnya you pay more as your income progress.
As your income grow, yeah.
So that's also standard in Australia. I think it go from 1 to 10% depending on your income level. The PH government in 2019, I think they tried to do this, but it got a huge public backlash. Sebab dia it doesn't go well with what they have promised, which is a more radical change. And until you come up with this one, a more neoliberal type of change.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think maybe they can learn from that lesson. It doesn't mean that you cannot do it at all. It's just that waktu dia orang buat tu is too drastic. It goes up to 15%. So imagine you are only paying 300 ringgit a month for PTPTN. Suddenly now you have to pay 1,200 ringgit.
Yeah.
Of course, people will get angry. So it's too drastic, right? You have to be more incremental in how you do it. Just like Australia, maximum 10%, not more than that. You start at 1%. Jangan terlalu banyak. So I think that's tiering and threshold, income-based repayment. And another thing that you can do for current debt ni is partial debt forgiveness lah. This is actually considered by PH at the time. I believe YB Nick Nazmi, the current Minister of Climate, he has spoke about this before. Nurul Izzat at the time as well. So basically, maksudnya ni you identify segment yang the poorest of the poor. That you know that they won't be able to pay. Not anytime soon, not 5 years or 10 years. But they still have the debt, they earn very little money. And if they don't continue paying, the government actually is paying for that. You pay the interest, like I mentioned, 1.7 billion in interest payment alone. So it actually makes your job easier as the government to partially forgive that debt for the poorest of the poor lah. Bukan kata T20 ke M40, but not even maybe the whole B40, just the bottom of the B40. So that will help ease PTPTN yang ni a bit lah. For the second set of the problem, which is orang yang belum ada loan lagi. Tapi for the future. But if you continue this, you're going to create more borrowers.
Definitely.
Maybe 3-4 million in the future. Kan? So for this one, we actually recommend a few policies lah. Then I'll maybe share just 3 of them here lah. The first one is like we have discussed, direct subsidy for tuition. Tak semestinya cost of living, just tuition tu for B40, you give direct subsidy instead of loan. The second one is basically you create lifelong saving account. So from birth, any Malaysian citizen that have a child lah, from birth, automatic set up satu account bank ataupun satu account pinjaman education, where you top in, let's say 50 ringgit, government also top in.
So it's per savings.
Yeah. So this actually combines the feature of 2 schemes we have had in the past, which is Adam 50. Adam 50, I believe YBKJ at the time, he drive this as well. And then SSBN by PTPTN. So we actually combine these 2 features lah. Yang kita dah ada, kita combine features dia. So I think it makes it more sustainable. And the third one, if I may, is more bukan PTPTN sahaja, but it's actually higher education as a whole lah. I think we, the society, the industry and the government actually have to move away from this, our obsession lah dengan nak pursue 4-year degree. Padahal kerja tu tak semestinya kena the 4-year degree pun. So I think you can incentivize TVET, micro credential,
matching skills,
matching skill, reskilling courses yang orang ambil 4 minggu, kemudian dia come up with project kan, dia ada portfolio dia, yang dia boleh tunjuk, okay, this is the project management that I did, this is my portfolio. Jadi benda-benda tu I rasa mungkin lagi sustainable compare dengan semua orang kena pergi 4-year degree 60,000. It's going to be less expensive lah.
Those are some very, very good points, and I do hope that whoever's watching can pick up on those. And like you said, these programs have already been around, and it's not difficult to sort of, make it or restructure it to the present day, right? I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Today we discussed about PTPTN and all the struggles and issues, and also solutions that we can take in order to invest in our future. Thank you so much, Kok Hin, for your time. I'm Panashe. Thank you for watching.